So I kind of wanted to start out with the beginning of your career because I was really intrigued to see that you started out doing a law degree at Oxford,
Yeah. Yeah.
and when you qualified to be a barrister, you didn't really feel like you were gelling with that career, and then you became an intern at Empire.
hmm
I was wondering what inspired that move, and then what did you learn from your law degree, which you could then apply to like journalism?
Big questions. Okay, so the inspiration, I mean, I kind of was always a film fan, I guess. I sort of I'd kind of gone through the phase in my teens of like making an effort to see the big films, to like watch the canon to kind of educate myself a bit on film, because I was already reading Empire and other magazines in those days, but I was, mostly Empire, and I kind of wanted to kind of understand the picture and the sort of the way things worked. So I had that in me and I loved the idea of being a film journalist, but it didn't seem realistic. I mean, I'm from Northern Ireland. You don't, it's not exactly like there's a big journalism industry there. There's a bit. My aunt was actually a journalist at the BBC, but in proper news, not like films and stuff. Um, so anyway, I was also just quite a sensible teenager. I'm much less sensible now, but like I was thinking like I want to have enough money, I want to have a nice life. So I was going for law, and and I just like I like bits of law. I like the arguing about ideas. I like the trying to figure out the best way through things. I like all of that. But sitting with a giant pile of documents every day for the rest of your life was not fun. And the way that you have to argue in a very specific, very mannered format,
Mm.
I found incredibly boring and frustrating. And I kept sticking with it because I went into law with French law, so I was a year behind like my friends who started at the same time, and they kept telling me, no, it gets better, it's really good, like you'll really enjoy like when you do your bar vocational course, when you come and do pupillage, and like I still hated it. I still hated it, but I was kind of again trying to be sensible. So basically, long story short, after I finished pupillage and I didn't get taken on, thank God, for a job essentially at the chambers where I was, an internship came up at Empire, and I was like, I have to give it a go. Like this is the time in my life where I could potentially give it a go, and they probably won't take me, and it will be fair enough, but I have to give it a try. And yeah, luckily, I think actually genuinely they lost my CV. Like not even like I did send it in, but there's somewhere between sending it in and the interview, like the email got lost or whatever. So they didn't have it in front of them. So that might not have hurt me, genuinely. But I knew the stuff that mattered to them because I've been reading the magazine obsessively. I've been reading the website obsessively since that was set up. I knew the kind of Empire style.
Mm.
So I think that's what got me the job. But yeah, going for it was just like, this is the time in my life where I can pursue a dream. And there's huge privilege in that because like I didn't have the kind of student fees that your generation has. I was very, very lucky that way. Mum and dad had helped me out even with like living costs in university. So I had some debt, but I didn't have like crazy, crazy debt. I'd worked my way through as well. I wasn't like rich, but I was, much better off than a lot of people nowadays. So I know that that's not necessarily something that applies to everyone. Um, and yeah, in terms of what law gave me that I brought to, what I do now, I think it is that idea of arguing, actually. And friends would say, yes, Helen, we know. But but I do think like a review at the end of the day, you are trying to convince someone that your opinion is worth listening to. So your opinion, your review is actually making an argument, this film is good or bad or indifferent, and here is why. Let me present my case for why this film is good, bad, or indifferent, And
Yeah.
so you are kind of laying out the facts and making a case for your opinion being if not right, at least worth listening to. And
Yeah.
that's I guess the big crossover.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I really admire that you took a kind of unconventional route because that's kind of similar to what I've done. So it's
Mm.
always really nice seeing someone like in the mainstream who's done similar things. And I also just wanted you to tell me a bit about your journey at Empire.
Mm.
I think it's such a big journey, and I think if you could tell me what you've learned that would help other aspiring film
Mm.
critics, I think that would be great.
It's a long list of things. So journey-wise, I was very lucky to start on the website at a time when we had, a website staff, right? So, I was there as some variety of intern for 22 months, but
Mm,
there was also like the editor at that time was Catherine. There was James, who's still there as her deputy, and then Amar, who designed and built the site, basically made it work.
mm,
So there were kind of four of us to begin with. That team expanded a bit. At one point, Chris came over to the website principally, or at least half and half. We had Sam for a bit. We had Phil de Semlin, who's now at Time Out. We had Ali Plum, who's now at Radio One. We had like fairly big staff at some points during the time. Um, I worked on the website for those first couple of years. Then I was on primarily the magazine for a couple of years, and then I went kind of back to the website for the last sort of 6, 7 years. I was on staff at Empire, so I kind of worked across both, which was really good because
yeah.
there are different priorities between print and
Mm,
online. Um, Online is more about speed and more about immediacy and more about getting the story up quick. I personally, and this was my own benchmark that I set myself, nobody was checking on me, but I personally like to have the list of BAFTA and Oscar nominations up before the BBC did.
yeah.
Like, and obviously it's not a fair race because they have way more levels of fact checking than I did, but like if I could type fast enough, I could get a pretty good list up before they did, and that was like my own little personal benchmark. Um, which was silly. Anyway, so you were going for immediacy, but you also wanted to be good. And I think the problem with the websites, the web, I don't mean the site, but the web nowadays is I think people have sometimes lost the good bit. And I think they're underinvesting to such a degree that that's really difficult to do now. That's a problem. But working across both was really helpful because I got much more of a sense of the different voice, slightly different voice. It's the same overall kind of brand. Obviously, it's the same empire, but there is a slight difference when you're writing something kind of for posterity in the magazine
Right.
versus, a blog for online. You can be a bit more personal, a bit more discursive. So it was kind of a good training in that sense. Um, I learned a lot just from the people I work with, that the level of casual film knowledge that
Mm,
someone like Chris Hewitt has or Ian
yeah.
Freer is off the charts. They can name you the third guy in the background, of that 1980s action movie and tell you three other movies he was in. It's really, really, and that kind of made me raise my game. I'm like, oh, okay. I thought I
Yeah.
was doing quite well here, but no, there's another level. And then also just getting better at writing. My big thing coming from law, and I think this is true of many people coming from academia,
Mm,
is that I was used to very long sentences.
yeah.
Lawyers write super long sentences, right?
Mm.
And I had to start chopping those up, first of all. You can, of course, have long sentences, but they should not all be long sentences. There should be some short ones and some medium ones. That you should mix it up. It's one of the things that gives your writing pace and rhythm is to mix up the length of sentences. They should not all be the same kind of length. So that kind of thing was a big learning curve. And then just learning not to write academically, to write for a general audience, to not assume, to figure out what knowledge you can assume and what knowledge you shouldn't assume. So,
Yeah.
you might assume that an Empire reader knows who Christopher Nolan is. I don't necessarily have to list all of his films
Yeah.
right after I say it. But if I'm writing about Jan Svankmajer, then it might be helpful, to list a couple of films or say a couple of words about what kind of director he is. Or it might be useful to, if nowadays as a freelancer, if I'm writing for like Grazia or like The Guardian or something, I can't even necessarily assume that those people know Christopher Nolan's name at the
Yeah.
drop of a hat. So you're always trying to kind of calibrate what you write for the audience and not in the sense of changing your opinions or being dishonest, but in the sense of figuring out what information people need
Mm.
to understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I remember when I wrote for Little White Lies for the first
Mm,
time, and that was so weird because like I'd been so used to writing for other people. I remember when I got my first draft back and the whole thing basically had highlights, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm.
mm.
I think it's like when you do start working with a lot of different people, you do pick up that skill, I
But
think.
also being edited is really helpful, actually. Like it will make you a better writer long term, even if it's really painful in the short term.
Yeah, no, it really can be. I think
Yeah.
sometimes, like, especially since editors have different kind of editing styles, sometimes you get like a full page of feedback, and I'm like, I'm not used to this, so it can be quite scary.
Yeah.
Um, I also wanted to ask, and I think this is probably like some of the most interesting stuff. you've spoken about your experience being one of, when you started out Empire, one of their only full-time female film critics.
Mm,
And I know you've kind of spoken about how women film critics get more flack than men for being vocal.
mm,
I was wondering what advice you would give to young women who are starting out in this industry because
mm.
it's not an easy thing to start out into.
No, it's not. I think, I mean, like I said, I was quite lucky actually that when I started, Catherine was still editing the website
Mm,
because that gave me kind of a model, of how it worked and how to behave. And she had previously, she basically was very high powered, went on to great things afterwards. And also we'd had Empire had had a female editor briefly, which again was kind of a model for me of
mm,
okay, this can be done. So I'm not saying that I was a pioneer or anything, but just for the most of the time I was there, I was the only one on staff. And I think that's something that, first of all, is beginning to change. Like Empire is very much looking out for women nowadays, like Sophie and Beth, who've been there recently, are fantastic, fantastic writers and just fantastic opinion havers. They really make their voices heard, and it's super, super good to see.
yeah.
Um, I think in terms of, the feedback and stuff online, I think you have to know it's going to come. It will come for everyone. It's not just women, but it's particularly women, and then even more so like women of color and so on.
Yeah.
Um, but you have to also just ignore them to a degree. And I've always found that advice quite unhelpful because for a long time on the internet, argued back with people, and I have had some success doing that. You can do that. There are people who you can argue back with, and you can point out the problems in what they've said. And some people, to be fair to them, may have said something frankly dickish or rude
Mm,
to begin with, and then actually when you call them out on it, will go, oh yes, well I didn't express that very well. I see your
yeah.
point, and sometimes that can be fine. And if you think that's what's happened, sometimes it can be good to push back.
Mm,
You don't, however, want to get into just a circular argument with a bunch of bots or trolls because that doesn't really that's just a waste of everyone's time.
yeah.
It can be fun sometimes. I spent like a weekend arguing about Batman v Superman, trying to use two GIFs, just two GIFs in almost, and it really worked really, really well. There was Dean Winchester looking smug and Sure Jan from the Brady Bunch, and you can do a lot with those GIFs. Anyway, so I'm not saying don't ever argue back, uh, but it can be good for the soul sometimes just to
Yeah.
argue back a little bit. But probably block and move on is better advice in most cases. And I think I do think there's a limit of how outraged you can be. If your job is criticizing other people and critiquing other people,
Mm,
you have to be okay with being critiqued yourself. And that goes for, working with an editor, but it also goes with people from the public telling you you're wrong. And, that's fine. If people think I'm wrong, that's not a problem.
mm.
If people are personal and sort of ridiculous about it, then kind of that's on them, whatever.
Yeah, I think picking your battles is such a hard thing because I remember when
Yeah,
I
very.
started out, yeah, I remember when I started out, it would always be like you'd always get some man saying something. Like I remember some guy said to me like one time I can't remember I made a video, I can't remember what the video was, and he was just like, I don't think you're a very good film critic. And I was like, that's your
Yeah.
opinion, but
Yeah. Okay.
cool, yeah, moving on.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for that, dude.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's like I think also just speaking about feminism can be really
Hmm.
feminism in films. People don't like that. I remember
No.
I wasn't a fan of. I'm not a Yorgos Lanthimos fan. I wasn't a
Mm.
fan of Poor Things. I put my opinion out, and it was not well received. And I think being vocal about how women are shown in film can be so divisive. Like I see
Yes.
people talking about a lot of people have a lot of criticism for how Christopher Nolan has written his female characters, and if you bring that up, men are like, no, don't want to hear it. And it's like I
Yeah.
think that there is validity in some things that are argued about. Definitely.
Yeah. 100%. I think, look, I like Christopher Nolan. I like his films, but I also think it's absolutely legitimate and, to be honest, quite necessary to say, hey, but his women, as a rule, suck. And even the women that he has kind of slaved over and sees as, one of the protagonists of the film, like Anne Hathaway in Interstellar,
Mm.
also suck. And if anything, suck worse. So, I feel like that's okay to say.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk about what's your favorite part of being a film journalist?
I mean, it's the films, really.
I
It
think that's
is
the
what
right
it is.
answer for everyone.
I mean, that sounds really like facile, but it is the films. I love just going to the cinema and watching films. And I will admit that, there is not the spring in my step necessarily as I go to see, I don't know, Sonic the Hedgehog 4, although it's my nephew's favorite series of films. But like, I do not necessarily have the same spring in my step for that as I do for the latest Steven Spielberg, the latest Martin Scorsese,
Yeah.
Barbie, Avengers Endgame, whatever. Not all films all the time, but as a general rule, yes, it is watching the films that is the most joyful thing. I do really sometimes enjoy interviewing people I love. I think that's wonderful. Sometimes it's such a privilege. It's so great to be able to do. But there's obviously a little bit more stress there because when you are going to do an interview, there's that sense of, well, first of all, you don't want to embarrass yourself. You may have, something you need them to talk about for the feature you're going to write. You may have, things you need answers on. So there is just a little bit more stress involved and a little bit more preparation and things like that. But just watching the films is a joy. I mean, my God, it's great.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's perhaps a boring answer, but it's true.
No, I think that's the right answer. I think if a film critic doesn't say that, I'm always like, why are you doing it then?
What do you, well,
Like,
yes,
why are
there
you
are other
here?
ways to make money and they are
Yeah,
much,
literally.
much more lucrative. Yeah.
It's funny because like I started listening to the Empire podcast probably like February this year, and
Mhm.
I'm always so like baffled that all of you can always just be like, oh yeah, and this week I interviewed Steven Spielberg. I'm always just like, how can you do that with such a calmness, you know?
Yeah, I think you do get it's a really weird thing and it kind of changes over time. So it's weird. Like if we see minor celebrities walking past the street in
Mm,
Soho, we'll be much more starstruck than if we go into a room where we know that an A-lister is waiting. I think there is
yeah.
an element of you are mentally and physically prepared for it to a degree, and
Mm,
therefore it feels like a less big ideal, less big deal. Having said that, sometimes you think you're prepared and then you walk into the room and you lose your mind. Now that can happen. And the one I always talk, I'm sorry, I've said this before if you've ever read an interview with me, but like the one where that very, very much happened to me was walking into the room for the first time with Keanu Reeves. And it
mm,
was literally a 5-minute video spot. So these are not the satisfying interviews for either journalist or subject, right? Because
yeah.
you can't really get into anything. So it was a 5-minute video spot for a film that was okay. It was the Day the Earth Stood Still remake. Fine.
Yeah.
So I was not super excited. I was like, oh, it is nice that I'm finally talking to Keanu. That is great. That's a name, ticked off the mental list I don't have, but this is cool. But I wasn't like super hyped. And then I walked into the room and my mental, like, just my mind went mad. I was like, holy shit. Holy shit, that is Ted. Oh my God, that is Johnny Utah. That is Neo. He's right there. This is crazy. And I literally, I mean, I kept it together, I think, on the outside, but inside I was fully losing my mind.
Yeah.
Um, and so it can surprise you that way. You can feel like you're prepared and then just totally not be. Some
Yeah.
of them are wildly charismatic, and there is such a thing as charisma. And when you meet that kind of charisma, it can kind of knock you over, and that can really kind of throw you off your beat as well. Again, I'm not like I've never been like a Robert Pattinson stan. Like I didn't fancy him. I was not the age to fancy Cedric Diggory when that came out. But when I went in to interview him for one of the Twilight movies, I'm like, oh my God, he's very handsome. And not in the sense of I fancy him, but just in the sense of it is distracting looking at him. That is like wow, what the heck?
Yeah.
So there's things like that as well. It's just like that you're just not necessarily always prepared for these people. And some of them genuinely do have like like a star quality, and it is quite a lot to negotiate.
Yeah.
But not in a bad way. Like it can be cool. And also some of them are just delightful human beings who it is a
Yeah.
pleasure to talk to. But yeah, it can be it can be pretty intense sometimes, yeah.
Do you have a standout memory alongside Keanu Reeves of a person that you've interviewed?
Oh, a lot. I mean, we don't really, let me see. Uh, I mean, like talking to Robert Duvall,
Hmm.
it was one of his more recent movies. I can't remember which one. I think he dances in it. We were talking about dancing, but then he does a lot of tango anyway. Um, but like I was sitting there going, well, you're in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
Like this is like 6 degrees of separation. to Gregory Peck. Are you fucking
Yeah.
kidding me? And like again, he's just a lovely man. He was being very charming and everything. But I was like, this is Robert Duvall. Oh my God, this is like more than half a century of film history that
Yeah.
I'm talking to. On one occasion, way early in my career, it was just a stand-up interview at the Empire Awards, which is something we used to have. I
Mm,
did like a what 3, 4 minutes, probably not more than that, with Tony Curtis. And so
mm.
I'm like, you worked with Marilyn Monroe, you worked with Jack Lemmon. Are you kidding me? Like that you were
Yeah.
inspired, it's just like it doesn't stop. So that kind of thing is was pretty amazing. That was really, really amazing. And Jane Fonda as well. I was like, holy shit, I'm in a room with Jane Fonda. Are you kidding?
Yeah,
Amazing.
again, I don't know how you do that. It blows my mind every time I listen to the podcast. And when I was researching you and I found out you interviewed Kermit the Frog, I was like,
Oh my God. I
even
mean,
Kermit
yeah.
the Frog, like that would throw me off so much.
Well, I mean, again, I've maybe talked about this before, but like they came in and obviously, the people who, let's call them Kermit's helper and Pepe the Prawn's helper were there and they were like, do you actually need to see them? Because this is audio. And me and James went, oh, no, it is just audio. But we obviously looked like stricken. We were like, can you just like take them out so we can like see them? You don't have to do the whole, but we really want to meet them.
Yeah.
And then they took pity on us and did the whole thing in
Mm,
character. And you do find yourself talking to Kermit and not the man behind him.
that's me.
100%. Like he's real. Like he just happens to need a bit of help, but he is 100% real.
That is so cool. Yeah, I could never imagine that. That is amazing. And like more into that side of your career, I've seen that you visited a lot of film sets. Which one were
Yeah.
you kind of the most blown away by?
Um, I mean, look, I mean, so many. I've been on set, I mean, just for sheer kind of scale and dazzle, I've
Mm,
been very, very lucky. I've been on set of Harry Potter's, which are
that's
mega.
I
I was
see.
in the room of requirement when it was burning, for example, right?
That's
I was on set of Dune. And I
mm,
spent a full hour just in the props department, just playing with like Chris knives and the Bene Gesserit paint box and the Gom Jabbar. Like I could just live there. Like it was incredible. And just the sets on that were the size of football fields. They were unbelievable.
wow.
Um, some of the Marvels as well. I mean, I was on set of Civil Civil War, right? Yeah, Civil War and First Avenger and Guardians of the Galaxy and Black Widow and those were all just great sets, they're just cool.
Mm,
Like they've got the scale, they've got the dazzle. I was on the set of a not terribly talked about film called 30 Days of Night,
mm,
which involved flying to New Zealand.
mm.
And there they had vampires on fire jumping out of a burning building into fake snow. And I'm like, this is what a set visit is supposed to be. Vampires, fire, fake
Mm.
snow. Yes. You know. So that kind of stuff, like that was like, this is special. So yeah, I mean, oh God, like so many. I was on 300.
Wow.
A lot of nakedness. I was on X-Men Origins Wolverine, and I'm a huge Wolverine stan, so that was really special, even if the film didn't 100% live up to my hopes.
Yeah.
Uh, even 90%. Even things like, I mean, again, films that were not that great as films, but they were incredible sets. So The Seventh Sons fantasy film for a few years ago with Ben Barnes.
Mm.
Great set visit, and like, we got to at least say hello to Jeff Bridges, like
Yeah.
incredible. And the same set visit, because it was literally the following day, I was
Mm.
on Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters, the second one anyway, the second of the films.
Mm.
And that was like, there's a dude walking around dressed as a centaur. This is okay, cool, I'll
Yeah.
take it.
That must be amazing because I don't know, I remember, and it's not the same, but obviously I grew up loving Harry Potter. Like
Mm,
I'm autistic and that was my hyperfixation for
mm,
like a good like 5 straight years of my life. And I
mm.
remember like going to studios and the studios are just like
Yeah,
it doesn't break your immersion weirdly. Like
no.
show you everything and I'm still like no, I feel like this is real to me. So I can't even imagine like especially something like June because that's just so like
Oh,
full scale. I
mhm.
can't even imagine seeing all of that because I think I would just like, it would blow me away.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. But like, I mean, the Harry Potter sets, I mean, I will say that the studio tour is literally they just took
Yeah.
those over, to the other building. I mean, and put them back together. It that's all what I saw. Like that is what I saw. I was like, oh yeah, I recognize that. Oh yeah, I recognize that because I was on set of the last what 3 films.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's amazing. I wanted to ask you about the book you wrote in the past about women in
Hmm.
Hollywood. And I was wondering what you have been struck most by in terms of how women's roles within the film industry have changed. It's a big question, but yeah.
Yeah, it is. I think it was just quite I mean, look, I kind of knew the outline, before obviously I started the book. I had to pitch the book before I started the research.
Mm,
And it was some of the numbers were still pretty horrifying. I feel like, you know, knowing knowing how many female, especially writers and directors and producers there were in the early silent era before the studio system kind of came in and built up,
yeah.
and how thoroughly they were pushed out was quite astonishing. Like I knew, obviously, the situation nowadays, it's like under 10% of directors most years of the big films are women. Like I knew it was going to be low numbers, but it was literally like well under 0.1% of directors for most of the studio era. And that was like, oh, I thought there were a couple, I thought there were a couple who were still managing to make films.
Yeah.
And it was a couple across a 40-year period. It was so, so bad. And putting some of those numbers together was quite sobering. The fact that 50% of scenario writers, again in the silent era, were
Mm,
women, and we're not anywhere close to that now. And that's writing. That is something that anybody can do with a typewriter. It should not be gendered. You
no.
know, like camera departments always argued that the reason there are fewer female cinematographers, and they're around 4 to 6%,
Mm,
is because in your early days in the camera departments, you're doing a lot of heavy lifting. You're picking up all these crates and everything, and only manly men can do that.
yeah.
Even though like manly men, shouldn't maybe be doing that because they're putting their knees out and their backs out and they should be lifting with other people. So women would be totally fine to do that, but whatever. But there's an argument that at least has been made, and it's becoming less and less relevant with light cameras, but it exists. It's an argument. I can respect that there's something there to be dealt with and to be addressed.
Yeah.
But then you look at something like animation, and you literally have, Walt Disney arguing that women can't animate because they don't have the right sense of rhythm. And you're like, well,
So
that's clearly ridiculous, isn't it?
yeah.
Like, so you look into these things and you're like, okay, well, you might have a case for this bit of life, but you definitely don't for that one. So it begins to look like sexism across the board. And I think that's the stuff that really kind of stuck with me. Also, some of the numbers. I mean, again, I had a sense of the pay gap in Hollywood already just from being a person in the world and from writing about film.
Yeah.
But the level of difference between the top male and top female stars is today startling. Never mind, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah. No, I think it is shocking because I feel like in some ways we are moving towards a better direction. Like I even think about something like intimacy coordinators. I mean that's good for
Hmm.
both men and women, but
Hmm.
you think about like I don't know, Emilia Clarke's experience on the Game of Thrones set when she
Yeah.
started out, and then you kind of look to now when you have this option where you can have someone actually coordinate and make sure it's a close set and things like that. There are a lot of ways where things definitely have improved, but I think there's still definitely a long way to go,
Yeah.
especially in terms of things like pay gaps. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think that was a thing for me. I've only really just started getting into like classic old Hollywood because in my mind I was always like, no, they're really, it's really sexist and I'm not going to find it funny. But then you kind of watch things like, Gentlemen Prefer Blonde. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed Gentlemen
Oh,
Prefer
it's
Blonde. And I
great.
was really
It's so good.
startled by that and how modern it felt. And on a more specific film question, because
Yeah.
you love the classics,
Mm.
this is kind of a fun one. If you were stuck in the world of a black and white classic for a day, which one would you pick and why?
But it would be His Girl Friday,
Okay,
actually. There's a
yeah.
reason I mentioned that. Just because Hildy Johnson, I feel like, is she's such an incredible character, especially for those of us who want to be journalists, right? I mean, she's a proper hard news journalist. She's not writing about films, but she is just the absolute like epitome of like cool lady journalist. I mean, it is such a great role. She is so funny. She's so sharp. She's bantering with Cary Grant. She improvised a bunch of lines. She worked with her brother to
Mhm.
like sharpen up and extend her lines in the script and then would come in every day and just throw them at the director. Like Howard Hawks would be like, what have you brought for us today? Like, come on. And the pace of the talking and the thinking in that movie is so much faster than
Mm.
virtually anything else. It's amazing. So yeah, I would do that. Not even to like steal Cary Grant for myself, literally just to hang out and watch him and Hildy jo and Rosalind Russell's Hildy Johnson,
Yeah.
work together because they're just incredible.
Yeah, no, I think I'd kind of be the same if it was like an observer role, but I think for me, my favorite is I think if I was going to try and steal James Stewart, it would be
Yeah.
Shot Around the Corner because that's just like
Oh yeah.
one.
Oh my God. And it's the right time of year for that as well. I
Yeah,
mean, perfect.
exactly.
Yeah.
But if I was just going to observe, I think it would have to be the Philadelphia story just for the drama
Oh,
because there's just so
mm,
much going on that whole weekend.
so much fun. So
Yeah.
much fun. Yeah.
And then another kind of specific film question. I'm
Mm.
trying to ask everyone I interview a kind of three film recommendation. I'm trying to change it each time to make it
Okay.
interesting. So, number one, this is so niche, but in the F1 movie, Brad Pitt describes there's a scene where he feels like he's in a flow state and his body
Uh-huh.
is like his body's an expansion of the car and he
Hmm.
feels like he's out of time.
Hmm.
Which film has a moment that feels like that for you?
Hmm.
Yeah, where you're just
Ooh.
in a flow state.
Oh, that's a good question.
It's a hard one.
It is actually, yeah. Might be something like, I mean, this is maybe basic, but I just watched E.T. with my small niece and nephew,
Hmm.
and just the bit where the bike takes off, really, and the John Williams score just comes up. You just feel like, well, you just feel like you're in good hands with Steven Spielberg and John Williams. Like you know that everything is going to be amazing, right? And you can just sort of relax into the film and not kind of think about anything almost. It's just like, oh, this is going to be glorious. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, great. Yeah. So
Yeah.
maybe something like that. Yeah.
That's no, that's a really nice answer.
Yeah.
I think if I had to pick, it would probably be. I just watched Amadeus for the first time,
Oh my God, what a
and
film.
that whole time, I like sometimes I feel like you watch a film and then you kind of completely forget where you are and what's going on, and I feel like
Hmm.
specifically that film, but I really loved the Don Giovanni sequence after Mozart's
Mm-hmm.
father passes away. I think that was it. I had to pull myself out and be like, no, no, I'm in a room. I'm not there.
Yeah.
Um, and then number two, this one's I think easier. The perfect film that you would want to watch with like a cup of tea on a cold day, as it's
I probably said this before as well, but honestly, one of my go-tos is Captain America, the First Avenger. Um,
that's
Not a cool answer, perhaps, but I just find it's so classic Hollywood while also being kind of, marvelly and up to date and everything else. But I just feel like it has the heart and the sort of sincerity and the kind of again just like the classic way it's made of the movies I remember from the 80s, but also the movies that I've gone back and watched from almost the 40s and 50s. Like
yeah.
it just feels very of its time, and I love that character at its best. I think that character is tip tops.
That's fair. No, I love the first one. I think because my dad got me and my sister and my brother into like I think that was kind of yeah where I started getting really into films when I was quite young. But I remember watching that and it just like it was everything a superhero film should be because it just had
Exactly.
so much emotion as well. And then finally, I think this one's a bit harder. A film that will change someone's perspective on what a film is.
Oh boy. I mean, I guess it depends where they're starting from. Um, hmm. I guess it's ones that kind of play with the format a little bit. I'm not into like deeply experimental films really. I'll watch them and sometimes appreciate them. I remember I was at the Zurich Film Festival a few years ago and I cannot remember the name of this film, so this is going to be a terrible anecdote, but maybe you can find it. But
Hmm.
I saw a film that is literally composed only of 360-degree shots, like
Wow.
as in the camera rotates
Hmm.
very slowly. Um, and 360-degree shots of first a forest and then a tree being cut down and then that tree being carried on a a truck and then that truck traveling across Europe and then that tree being packed onto a ship and then that ship going to weirdly South America and Brazil and Amazonia and being used to build things there. Don't
Okay.
quite understand why you're bringing trees to the Amazon, but they were.
Yeah.
Um, and it's so bare bones and meditative and kind of experimental that I thought that was really weirdly fascinating. So maybe something like that, but also just again, depending on where people are starting from, a Terrence Malick might be the one to just expand their minds and just show you the benefits of just almost sitting in silence with grass. By which I mean the plants, not the drug, but literally just sitting in a field watching the grass blow. I mean, the Thin Red Line, the first time I saw that just completely blew my mind. That was my first Terrence Malick.
Yeah.
And I just find it so meditative and beautiful and moving. Oh, I tell you another one actually that comes to mind now is, and maybe this is a better answer, is Patterson.
Mhm.
So I went to see that with my sister, and just before it started, I sort of went, oh, and I leaned over and I goes, look, just FYI, because I don't think you've seen any of his films before. This is a Jim Jarmusch, so nothing's going to happen, but it's going to not happen in a really interesting way. And
Yeah.
she was like, okay. And we got to the end of the film. She was like, oh yeah, you were right. I see now. But like, so nothing happens in that film. It's a guy who has a completely normal routine that he just does over and over again through the film, and his normal routine could not be more normal. He is
Right.
literally walking the dog, having breakfast with his wife, walking the dog, going to work, going to sleep, like going from maybe one drink in the bar. That's the entire film over
Yeah.
and over 7 times. And there's a tiny bit of what you might charitably call drama at the end, but it's not that dramatic. But I love it so much. I think it's wonderful. And so I think things like that maybe can show you that it's not just much as I love, and I love Marvel movies and big spectacle and all of this. I do think there's a lot to be said for these kind of completely stripped down, meditative, almost silent movies. I think they're amazing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. I think for me, when I've been starting to get into films and expanding out, I think things
Mm.
that play with genre and narrative are so interesting. Like I remember watching In the Mood for Love, which is basically
Oh my God.
it just
Incredible
becomes,
film. Yeah.
yeah, it just becomes like music, really. Like there's
Mhm.
no discernible like dialogue at one point. It's just like things happening across time, and I think that's amazing. And
And
then
it's just like the emotional impact of that film is just like, oh my God.
I know it
Yeah.
shocks you quite a lot, and I think
Mm.
also things like even Tarantino because he just
Mm.
combines things in such interesting
Yeah.
ways. You can tell that he just understands the ins and outs of film. I mean, yeah, you'll know that better than me, but he understands the ins and outs of films
Yeah.
like to an amazing degree.
Absolutely. Even something like Parasite, I
Yeah.
don't know if you've seen Parasite, but when that
Yeah.
door opens, like no spoilers, but like that, I have never, I mean, I heard a reaction in the room, and this is like cynical old London critics, right? And everybody sort of went,
Yeah.
and it was just like, what is happening? And the way that he goes from sort of comedy to something very different over
Mm.
the course of that film is so incredible. It's just
Mm.
amazing.
I think anything that blends genres together like that is
Mm.
always a really good place to kind of show you that film can be more than just like one solid thing. Definitely.
Exactly. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Yeah, and my final question is, what are your thoughts on film in 2025 as it stands right now?
It's really weird because I think we've ended up with some incredible films this year. So, things like Sinners and One Bat Left Another and Hamnet and stuff like this are incredible. And there have been some, good big movies as well. I thought Fantastic Four was a real return to form for Marvel. I'm really excited about the new Avatar, all this kind of stuff. Um, so we have great stuff happening, but at the same time, I think the industry is facing a massive crisis that is mostly of its own making. And when I say its own making, I mean the executives in charge of the studios, because I don't think we've ever had a worse bunch of executives in charge of studios. I think they are so beholden to the markets and not to making good cinema, which is ultimately the best way to make money long term in Hollywood is to make good films. And they think that all they can do is make the same thing over and over again. And I think that's a hugely damaging thing to do. And I think that long term, it is the only thing that is doomed definitely to fail.
Yeah.
Um, and I think we're beginning to see that. I think that's one of the reasons that people aren't going to cinema as much as they used to, is because they have been conditioned to expect only remakes, sequels, prequels,
Yeah.
reboots, whatever. And there is other stuff there, but I think because people have been trained out of going, they're missing the good stuff, and that's reinforcing this narrative that
Mm,
it's only the sequels and prequels that get the bums on seats.
yeah.
So I think there's a crisis of trying to get the word out to people in advertising. I think there's a crisis of bravery in commissioning films at the highest levels anyway. I think films probably cost too much, and I think we probably need to bring the prices down, but we do that by first of all, tackling things like salary and not, by making more VFX workers work through the night for 50p. I don't know how to do that, but that does need to happen. So there is a kind of low-key bubbling crisis, and that's before we introduce AI to the mix. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I genuinely believe we have a better crop of filmmakers than ever in Hollywood history. I think the people working today are off the charts. I would put the Ryan Johnsons and the Paul Thomas Andersons and the Scorseses and the whoever else you want to think of up against, Howard Hawks and Howard Hughes and all the rest any day of the week. I feel like they're absolutely up there with the John Fords and everyone else, and I just want them to have the chance to make those movies.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag, let's say.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I was talking to my parents about this yesterday. I
Mm.
think the post-COVID effect on cinema is crazy because I think obviously cinema was, it was making no money, and then
Mm.
they were like, "Oh, how do we quickly get everyone back into the
Yep.
cinema?" And I think we are just stuck in this format now of like, "Oh, well, we know like live action remakes will bring people back to the cinema," and it's like, if there's not a lot on, then families will just pile in to go see, the new Moana live action
Yeah.
film or the How to Train Your Dragon live action film, and I think there's also like the Marvel impact of Endgame and Infinity War were such high points, and then you introduce the multiverse, and then it kind of implodes in on itself. And I
Yeah.
think there are so many factors, which is why things like I saw like Companion and Sinners this
Hmm.
year. I think those kinds of well, original ideas or riffing off of old ideas but aren't attached to a big franchise are like so important right now because
100%.
they're
Yeah,
reminding
100%.
people that yeah, originality still exists in films, and there are reasons why you should still go to the cinema because I think
Absolutely.
there are, yeah, I think it is struggling right now, definitely. But
100%. Yeah. Oh well, but yes, I mean, we've just got to hope for the best because I do think that the current economic path is not a good one. So fingers crossed they come up with something else.
yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's everything I had to ask you.
All
Thank
right.
you so much
Well,
for
absolute pleasure talking to you.